All right. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to the show, the Shout Out Show with me, your host, Preacher Moss. And let me give a special shout off the top to those that serve here in the United States. They serve abroad. They keep us safe. They protect our vital interests all over the country. Please just give a shout out to our veterans here in the United States, all over the world. This is Memorial Day, and I thought it would be appropriate, if you will, to actually take some time to talk about the aspect of service. A lot of times when we think of Memorial Day, there's this rush to look at service in war. And I always, and I'll give you a little background. I never was in the service. I was never in the service, but I was in that last group of people that actually had to file or register for Selective Service in case there was a war. Selective Service was like the draft, but I was in that last group that had to actually sign up. I was actually in college that had to do it. And on top of that, I had a lot of experience with military life, military regiment, because I went to a military school for 6 years. Thank you very much, Mary Moss. And it was interesting because it shaped a lot of what I do today, but it also shaped a lot of what we're going to talk about veterans. But the thing about Memorial Day is we celebrate those that have fallen. And I think more and more we have to celebrate those who have served and served well and served selflessly. I mean, I come from a family that had people who served overseas in actual war. My uncle was in the Vietnam War. My father served during the Cold War. I had two uncles that served. I mean, it was a different time, man. It was a very different time. And I think when I say it was a different time, it's like wars were really framed around policy that either supported or they rejected American, the American way. Now it's not the American way, it's more like American exceptionalism. But I'm just talking about the beauty of life, liberty, and freedom for everybody. It's a very, very compelling argument when we start talking about our borders. I remember 9/11 and the rush, if you will. People were dropping everything they did when 9/11, when America got attacked, to actually go and serve. I know my brother JT, Johnny Thomas, actually, he had served, had left the military, and was seriously considering going back. Do you hear what I'm saying? He was considering going back to serve in the military. And I have my cousin Earl Bethel. He was also a veteran as well. And when you start breaking this down, where does that mentality come from? When you say you serve to protect ideals, and I thought that was a really, really valid point, a really, really interesting topic of discussion, serving ideals. Because I think we've gotten away from serving ideals. We serve things that are ideal to us, but I'm talking about a universal argument whereby we can rally behind something. Because if you look at the breakdown of wars, if you will, from World War I to World War II to the Korean War, Vietnamese War, and the Gulf Wars, if you will, it's interesting how it legitimately moved away from how we would fight wars conventionally, but also how we would engage wars. And of course, sadly, the reality is the engagement is the loss of human life. And when I think about this, there's a thing. I talked to a veteran maybe a couple months ago, and he says, when you go overseas and you see the kind of trauma, he was speaking about his time over in Iraq. But he said, when you go and you see the amount of suffering, he says a little bit of you dies there. He said, a little bit of you dies there. And when I start thinking about how these brothers come back, we have terms we didn't have, post-traumatic stress disorder and things like that, which is the revealing of the fact that these things aren't natural. Going to war is not natural. Inflicting pain, inflicting hurt. I'm not talking about just hurt. I'm talking about generational pain. I'm going to inflict generational pain. It will last, if you will, over a number of years. I think, this is something that we really need to look at, because when we don't have wars, it seems to me that we're still fighting. And we don't have war, but we're still fighting these ideological wars, if you will. We're still fighting the political wars. And it seems to me from the ideological wars and the political wars, we seem to find ourselves in some kind of conflict all over the country. When I also think about Memorial Day, I have to frame the truth that, a lot of these wars, particularly going back to everything after the World War II, we had a disproportionate amount of African Americans going over to serve. Poor, disadvantaged people who didn't have access to education. That was back in the day, the way that you could defer military service, that you went to school. So revisiting me talking about having to sign up for Selective Service, you had to go down to the post office and you had to give you information. And I didn't have a problem with that. Let's just be really clear. I didn't have a problem with that. If it meant serving my country to protect our loved ones, I was more than willing to do that. But in that space, in this particular day of Memorial Day, I think we need to take time to place appropriate evaluation of folks that have given their lives. Folks who live this ideal. And I mean, they seem like everyday, ordinary folks, but they're superheroes. Many of us cannot get in our head that we're going to go over to a place we don't know. We're going to fight people we don't know. And we're going to engage in God knows what kind of activity in the name of freedom. That's something that's powerful. Like, it bothers me when I start thinking about what's that mindset, because a lot of times people come back with that mindset and they're traumatized. When I say traumatized, I mean, nobody goes over the war and comes back the same. Okay. When you go through something traumatic, in regards to what my friend said, a little piece of you dies. Something's killed off and something grows in its place, but there's a balance and you have to find that balance, if you will. And I want to give a shout out to my sister. This is Sister Isla from Baltimore. Thank you, big sis. She said we have an adversarial culture, unfortunately. Yes. And I need to build on that, Sister Isla. We have an adversarial culture because what is interesting is we have a culture that is not efficient these days in problem solution. We don't think critically before we get into situations. Thereby, if you take a whole bunch of people who are not critical thinkers and put them in a room, guess what they're not going to do? They're not going to critically think. We have a society whereby things are disposable. So when we talk about people going overseas, they're like moving parts. We speak of them as human capital, not as human beings. And so there's this overlay. So when I would see people like my uncle, I would see people like my father who'd served, but there's something in them that's an inherent sadness. Some like my father talked to me about his friend, and it was about his friend who had gone over and served. Now, my father, I don't know how this happened, Allah knows best. But when he was drafted, he wound up going with the Army Corps of Engineers to Germany during the Cold War. So he didn't go to Vietnam. So they worked on building bridges and stuff like that. And it was dangerous at that time. But his friend, his very close friend that stood up in his wedding, went to Vietnam. And the guy came back. He was never the same again. I asked my dad about that a couple weeks ago. And he said, one of the things is there's a truth that comes with having around you a presence around you that's death. Like, you could die for something other than yourself. You could die for a policy. You could die from somebody not being attentive. You could die for somebody's other intent. The intent is to inflict pain. It's not, you're just a byproduct of that fact, And I'm like, when do we get to a situation, a scenario, we backtrack? People ask critical questions before we get into situations. Like right now, today should not just be a Memorial Day for soldiers. There should be another Memorial Day. We have probably surpassed 100,000 people dying from COVID-19 in the United States. Over 100,000 people dying from COVID-19 in the United States. I can find you not too long ago, 2 weeks ago, where the estimate was 60,000 people. That was it. We're going to 60,000 people. Then all of a sudden, nobody talked about 100,000. It was mentioned, but nobody was talking about it. Where's the Memorial Day for those people? We say we want to protect and serve our citizens. We want to make sure that they have all the freedoms, rights, liberty, justice. But what happened? And this serves as something, it's a bit of a reminder too. All wars are not physical wars. All wars are not physical wars. This is a health crisis right now. We're fighting a war of health crisis. Sometimes there's a war of emotion, if you will. But I think in this situation, we begin to think, and I think this right here should really, it should really cement us as people. Memorial Day has always been that day where we go to, I'm from originally from Washington, D.C. You go to Arlington Cemetery and you take, if you will, you take the flag, you take it to your loved ones there, and we have a lot of memorials. You have the Vietnam Memorial, but I don't think people really connect what it is you're actually seeing, because it's a souvenir. People talk about it's a souvenir. Thank you, sister. Yes. She's talking about COVID-19, and we're going to be dealing with COVID-19 trauma for a long day. This will be a day, or this will be a year, or this will be an experience that we're going to remember for a long time, because it proves something. All wars you can't fight with military arms. All wars you can't fight with money. COVID-19 was a flattening. It was a flattening. If they talk about the Spanish flu in the 1900s, that was a flattening that happened around the war. That Spanish flu killed more people than the actual people in the war. And here we are. Thank you, Sister Angela, for reminding us. We have something that's killed more people than the Nagasaki bomb, and we're not talking about it. We are very calm, if you will. I don't want to say passive, but very calm. And I think that comes from a bit of disconnect. Like when Vietnam veterans came back from the United States after serving their country, one of the things that broke their heart, one of the things that really established a disconnect was the fact that people didn't engage them as people anymore. This is a very pass-fail culture. To Sister Isla's point, adversarial culture. That's what pass-fail culture is for some people. Dr. Sherman Jackson said something that was amazing in one of his talks. I would love to find it for you. But he said there is a space now whereby people can't be wrong. He said back in the day of scholars, even the brightest scholars knew that I'm right with the possibility of being wrong. I'm wrong with the possibility of being right. But that was it. Now it is, for me to be right, you must be wrong. And for me to be right, you must be wrong, meaning that there's a sense of absolutism. I have to be correct. And to do so, I can't listen to anything else that you're saying. I can't entertain anything else you're saying. I can't hear you. Basically, Everyone, a lot of people walk around with their own Fox News channel, for lack of a better word. Cognitive dissonance. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I'm going to throw something else out there too, sister. There's cognitive dissonance, and then in the space of our heart and our intellect, there's something that's called cognitive surplus. Cognitive surplus. And it means that there are spaces in our schedules, in our lives, where we have a little bit of time where we could do something with something. The best example would be back in the early 1800s in Europe, particularly in England. They had an invasion of gypsies, if you will. And the gypsies would come, and what happened was the gypsies were in a space whereby they couldn't really fully engage English culture. So they developed, of course, their own culture. They had gypsy culture. And one of the aspects of gypsy culture was developing an alcoholic drink. They developed an alcoholic drink. And once it moved into mainstream culture, what happened was people developed behavior, I want to say behavior and discipline around this alcoholic drink, meaning that we frame ourselves to be open for particular things. Like, it doesn't matter how crazy it is, there's one thing you're going to make sure you will avail yourself for. And that space, that time, if you will, is cognitive surplus. One of the things we're dealing with right now here with COVID-19, a lot of people don't realize, is the thing that's driving folks crazy is they have an excess of cognitive surplus. When you were at work, your day was framed. You got to work, you got your coffee, things like that, blah, 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 lunch, da, 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 da. You come home, traffic, you know you're going to be in traffic 45, 50 minutes, come home, you see your kids, put them on homework, whatever, that's what it was. Now you have more of that because society has been flattened, meaning that some of the things you used to do, some of the things you used to lend your cognitive surplus to, you no longer do it. You can't do it anymore. It doesn't appeal to you. That way, you're not rational that way. And if you start thinking about it, to expand even further, look at the things that you're seeing on TV, Netflix, Hulu. They have a new one on Xfinity TV, Peacock, it's free. It's a whole new streaming network. And I'm only shouting out Peacock because one reason. Number one, is free. Well, two reasons. One, is free, and number two, they carry the complete seasons of Columbo. I'm a Columbo guy. So see, they already figured out how to get my cognitive surplus. But when you give that cognitive surplus to these things, are they really important things? Are they really important things? You know, the interesting thing about Memorial Day is more, it's like a shopping day. Look at the behavior on Memorial Day. Everybody couldn't wait to get to the beach. You couldn't wait to get to it is so far and away from people that gave their lives. And I'm not surprised, because we're talking about right now 100,000 people that gave their lives. It's always about context. So as we begin to move away from Memorial Day, I'm going to say every day, stop and engage some type of thing about Memorial Day. What did you remember from yesterday? What do you remember from 2 days ago? You know, where are you going to pull value? Everything can't be a situation where it results in trauma. I would really, really emphasize that we stop pulling experiences from trauma. Who says a Memorial Day can't be positive? Who says we can't celebrate good things that happen and we have our own Memorial Day? Like, we recently had a celebration for Malcolm X. And I love Malcolm X. But you know what? A lot of us spend a lot of time talking about Malcolm X because there was a movie that came out. I'm in a documentary, Who Killed Malcolm X? And, you know, it brought up a lot of emotions, if you will. It brought up a lot of emotions. So, and we celebrate Malcolm, but we celebrate it in retrospect, almost like, you know, what was or what could have been. I'm going to issue a new edict for Memorial Day. It's positive Memorial Day, meaning that we're going to do things, myself, you, let's just make a pact, if you will. We're going to do things that emphasize positivity in our lives and move away from the scope of trauma. I can remember certain things about Ramadan, if you will. When I started this podcast, it was a threat that I was going to do 30 for 30 with Ramadan. I was going to do the 30 days of 30 shows. I'm going to do a show a day. And look where we are now. People that tune in and have great Sister Issa's like my big sister. God bless you up in Baltimore. Sister Angela, thank you again for coming. I could appreciate you. But let me add a few things on here. I feel personally that we need to switch the paradigm, particularly in the African American community, because I find us having to celebrate other people's trauma. That was the only thing I didn't like about Memorial Day. We're celebrating other people's traumas. We're still dealing with a particular type of trauma here, and there's no disrespect to those who gave their lives, full respect. But we're here right now and in the present, and we need to make sure that we're dealing with those things that affect us right now, moving away from trauma and switching around. I would say, what's the formula for any of us, if you will, taking our cognitive surplus back? And Sister Angela said, reducing the cognitive dissonance, but in a way, we're going to take our cognitive surplus back. We're going to remove it from society. We're going to revalue. We're going to put a new valuation on it in terms of where we want it to be. There was a sister, Sister Keela Rock. God bless this sister. Let me tell you about cognitive surplus. This sister just got her bachelor's degree in human resources. That's not the thing. She got her bachelor's degree in human resources after 30 years. After 30 years. And I gave her a hard time about taking 30 years. And I told her, hey, listen, a lot of people are going to tell you to continue education. Like, don't listen to them, because at this rate, for you to get a master's, you're probably going to be 109 when you get it. But beyond the jokes was the fact that this sister stuck in something for 30 years and continued to see the bigger picture, the light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm like, that is a certain kind of dedication that I'm proud of. And I believe we need to start moving back to that. Yeah. Because in the end, we say memorial. What is a memorial? What is a memorial? And think about this. How many memorials do we have that are actually positive? Got the Lincoln Memorial. But Lincoln represents a time where there was slavery. Why do we celebrate Lincoln? Because he, quote unquote, freed the slaves. That's not true. That makes it seem like slaves were just waiting around to be free. Like, hey, you want to run away? Not till Abe says so. That's not the way it was. We celebrate a plethora of wars and we put it in one holiday called Memorial Day. But we don't talk about the policies that got these brothers and sisters killed. We don't understand, or we don't do our research in terms of that particular time. And I'm saying this is important because if you don't look at it, you don't examine it, you don't ask crucial questions and critical questions, we're bound to do it again. We all live in a society where we're thinking our president, through force of personality, or failure of leadership, and failure of character, could realistically lead us back to war. So as we begin to wrap this up, because I don't like to do a long show. I like to do a good show. I don't like to do a long show. We need to get back to the fact that we start asking critical questions. The memorial. What memorials are you building in your life? What memorials are you putting new valuations on? Your cognitive surplus, as opposed to your cognitive dissonance. Your cognitive surplus. How are you taking that back? Because there's all kinds of noise and distraction and sounds, but not sounds, but distractions, telling us what to do. You ever go on Instagram? Instagram is a constant source, and Facebook too, is a constant source of what? People grabbing or trying to tell you what to do with your cognitive surplus. That time, that most valuable, crucial time that you have to yourself. Who are you going to give it to? And how are you going to express it? How are you going to expand it? We all sit around and we're examples to children and family and things like that. I would say, look at the facts. Look at the facts. We celebrate Memorial Day, and I will say I celebrate, and I have nothing but respect for people that gave their lives for their country. And I'm only going to say that because I was one of the people who was willing to go. My cousin Earl Bethel had to go to Gulf War. Johnny Thomas, he was supposed to go. He did not go, but he was ready to go. Even 9/11, he was ready to go. My uncle went to Vietnam. My father went to Germany. Now, this is black people looking at how society treats them and says, beyond that, I'm still willing to go serve for my country. I mean, you talk about a special type of mentality, people. A special type of mentality. Let me even give you more facts, and then I'm going to get out of here because it is Memorial Day. Of all the black people that I've mentioned, if you go back to it, all of them had to fight through racism and Jim Crow to serve their country. How ill is that? Like literally, how ill is that? I have to fight for you. I mean, we talking about the, Tuskegee Airmen. That was a fight to be airmen. Battalions, black battalions, they fought to be. The Spike Lee movie was a great movie about soldiers fighting over in Italy. They had to fight to go and serve their country and then come back. Homebound. Well, I think it was Mudbound. It was on Netflix. People, we're talking about extraordinary folks, particularly African Americans, Latinos, extraordinary folks who can see the bigger picture beyond the condition that they were working in or being dealt. They move beyond it. So Memorial Day has to be a little bit more for me. Can be about, the people who serve. That's one thing. But it has to be on the flip side, an examination of cognitive surplus. And that in and of itself is, how do we begin to move away from celebrating trauma? Brothers and sisters, I got to go. Hold on a minute. My mom just hit me up with the first comment, people. She's been working on this all month long. Many black soldiers want rights overseas for others because that experience equal rights back home. Yes, mama, you are 100% correct. And if any of you guys sit up here, preachers on this thing, listen. My mother, I learned it from the best. You know what? I learned it from the best. And I hope that in this short little brief interchange that we've had on this show, I would hope that, we would look at this situation a little bit differently. Because Memorial Day will end today. But there are memorials being held every day. And I would encourage everybody, to look at that time and space. Examine cognitive surplus with importance and focus and discipline. What are you giving your time to? What are you giving your service to? And with that, hopefully asking critical questions, sound like a sister? Hopefully asking critical questions, you will find a different purpose as you move forward. So that's all I got. My big brother, Jabril, out of Charlotte, man, always a pleasure. So I think I'm going to have to do a whole nother show about cognitive surplus for the viewers. I think I have to go deeper. And I hope you guys don't mind. I think I'm going to do a thing on cognitive surplus, and I'm just going to be irreverently funny about it so we can have fun. So I have to get ready to get out. Sister Akila, we love you. Congratulations on getting your degree. Took the sister 30 years to get it. 30 years to get it. I told her, when you started your course for a degree, Belle Biv DeGroat was still a group. Poison! All right. So listen, I got to go. You guys have been tremendous. Inshallah, you know what? We're going to keep the shout out show going. We're going to make this a regular thing as long as I have people that want to listen and I have some ideas I want to get out. And I want to thank everybody for coming to the show. You could have been other places. I want to thank you for coming to the show and supporting the idea, particularly of a Muslim shout-out show, if you will. Something that's a little bit away from the minbar, if you will, because, these ideas you can't put on the minbar. But you can put them in space, and we can respond, and we can have a good time. We have our own community. That's what the shout-out show is. It's going to be a community. In 6 months, a year, we're all going to be giving shout-outs. So listen, appreciate you. God bless you. Enjoy the rest of Memorial Day. But tomorrow, think about what memorials you want to leave. And think about that cognitive surplus. Get smart. Don't let people take something that you think you don't have. So listen, I'm going to get ready to get out of here. There you go, brother. I know there's still a group. I know. And I'm going to give us Walaikum assalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, Sister Nafisa. So listen, I'm going to get out of here. You guys have been tremendous. I'll be back tomorrow, same time. That would be 6 o'clock Eastern time, 5 o'clock Central time, and that would also be 3 o'clock Pacific time. And if you don't have a watch, you out of time. Listen, thank you so much. God bless you. Shout out show. Preacher Mars. Enjoy the rest of your holiday. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.